Welcome to the deep dive. The date is Friday, March 6th, 2026. And if you've been looking at the news this morning,
Or your investment portfolio.
yeah, right, or even just checking the price of gas at your local station, you already know that something massive is shifting under our feet today.
It's been a wild morning.
It really has. So today, our mission is to guide you through a highly urgent, freshly intercepted document. We are looking at a comprehensive global situation briefing, and this is from Ping AI Conflict Intelligence.
Right, and just to give you some context on what we're actually looking at here, Ping AI isn't your standard news aggregator.
No, not at all.
This is an unclassified intelligence dashboard. It ingests massive, unimaginably large data sets from across the globe in real time. So as we're sitting here, it's analyzing 50 distinct ongoing global events.
50.
Yeah, 50. It pulls from 4 main sources. So you have the GDLT project, which monitors global news, print, web media. Then it pulls social intelligence from Grok on the X platform.
To gauge the immediate human reactions, right?
Exactly, the on-the-ground reports. And it even integrates meteorological and environmental data from NOAA and the National Weather Service.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you combine all of those disparate data points, from troop movements to weather patterns to social media panic, the Ping AI system has distilled it all down to a single overarching assessment.
And it's a grim one.
Yeah. The global threat level right now is classified as critical.
That classification is incredibly rare. The system requires a convergence of multiple high-impact vectors to trigger a critical designation.
And just to jump in for a second, the briefing specifically points to simultaneous massive kinetic conflicts, unprecedented economic shocks, and just heartbreaking humanitarian crises.
With everything everywhere all at once.
Right. But before we get into the details of what kinetic actually means in this context or where these shocks are happening, I need to make something absolutely clear to you, the listener.
Yeah, this is important.
We're going to be covering highly sensitive, politically charged conflicts today, specifically involving the United States, Israel, Iran, and Hezbollah. We are not taking any sides here.
None at all.
We are impartially reporting the data from this Ping AI intelligence briefing to help you understand the realities on the ground without endorsing any viewpoint. Our only goal is to lay out the facts exactly as they're being reported in this March 6th briefing.
It's an important distinction to make. Our objective today is to act as your guides through this data. We want to cut through the noise, the panic, the chaos, and just connect the dots.
Because it's a lot of noise.
A ton of noise.
Yeah.
The goal is to explain exactly how a massive military strike in the Middle East, a sudden torpedo attack off the coast of Sri Lanka, and a devastating landslide at a mining facility in the Congo all tie into the exact same fragile global system.
The same system that affects you directly.
Exactly. This isn't abstract geopolitics happening in a vacuum. This is the interconnected architecture of the modern world being tested all at once.
So let's start with the primary theater, which is the massive escalation in the Middle East. The top headline from the Ping AI briefing is staggering. We are looking at broad U.S. and Israeli airstrikes that have hit Iranian military, nuclear, and civilian infrastructure.
The sheer scale of it.
It's overwhelming. The human cost reported here, over 12,230 people have been killed.
The scale of this operation is what immediately jumps out from the data. When we analyze the specific targets detailed in the intelligence briefing, we're seeing a highly coordinated, systematic dismantling of critical infrastructure.
So what exactly got hit?
Well, the strikes have targeted infrastructure deeply embedded within Tehran itself. Numerous Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC sites, and crucially, the Natanz nuclear facility.
Natanz.
Yeah. And the briefing specifically notes that the strike on Natanz has been verified by the UN nuclear watchdog. But the most tragic data point here, as you alluded to, is the civilian toll. The dashboard explicitly highlights that 175 of those deaths resulted from school bombings.
Man, I want to pause on the term kinetic that we used earlier, because this is the brutal reality of it. It's not a cyber attack or a diplomatic sanction. We're talking about high explosives in densely populated areas. The line between military targets and civilian infrastructure is just so often blurred, and the consequences are devastating.
They really are.
But I also want to ask about the Natanz nuclear facility, because when we talk about hitting a target like that, the stakes just seem to go stratospheric. What exactly is Natanz, and why is this such a monumental data point?
Well, what's critical to understand here is that Natanz is the crown jewel of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. It's a massive, heavily fortified complex. Much of it is built deep underground.
To protect it from exactly this kind of aerial bombardment, I'm guessing.
Precisely. Inside Natanz are the centrifuges that spin uranium gas at supersonic speeds to separate out the fissile isotopes needed for nuclear power, or, if enriched highly enough, a nuclear weapon. So what's critical to understand is the strategic intent weighed against the astronomical risk. From a purely military standpoint, the goal of these joint strikes is to severely degrade Iran's retaliatory capacity. By hitting the IRGC sites and the command infrastructure in Tehran, they're attempting to blind the Iranian military and limit their ability to coordinate a counterattack.
But hitting the nuclear facility seems like an entirely different calculus.
It is an entirely different calculus.
Yeah.
Hitting Natanz crosses a massive, decades-old red line in international relations. It severely risks a nuclear escalation.
Because you're not just destroying concrete bunkers.
Right. You are fundamentally altering the geopolitical calculus of a nation that the international community has long considered to be on the threshold of nuclear weapons capability. If the leadership in Tehran feels their conventional military has been decimated and their nuclear program is under existential threat, their back is against the wall.
And when you factor in the 1,230-plus deaths, especially those 175 casualties from the school bombings, you are guaranteeing a massive civilian and political backlash.
It almost inevitably solidifies domestic resolve within Iran. When a population is under heavy bombardment and suffering tragic civilian losses, the internal political pressure usually demands a fierce response.
Which makes any diplomatic off-ramps virtually impossible to navigate.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the immediate aftermath, because the briefing pivots directly to the Iranian retaliation. Clearly, their capacity to punch back wasn't entirely degraded by those initial strikes.
Not at all.
And this is where the human cost for the United States comes into sharp focus. According to Ping II, massive drone and missile barrages have targeted U.S. assets. Specifically, strikes on U.S. bases in Kuwait and other Gulf states have left 6 U.S. soldiers dead and 18 wounded.
We really need to contextualize how monumental a shift this is. For years, decades really, the conflict in this region between the U.S. and Iran has largely been characterized by proxy warfare.
Right, funding other groups to do the fighting.
Exactly. Iran has traditionally utilized a network of aligned proxy groups, militias in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, to engage with U.S. and allied forces. It provided a layer of plausible deniability. It kept the temperature just below a boiling point.
But this data point from the briefing changes the paradigm completely.
Completely. A direct, lethal drone and missile barrage originating from Iranian territory hitting a U.S. base in Kuwait is a fundamental escalation.
Right, because this isn't a proxy skirmish in the desert anymore. 6 American service members have lost their lives from a direct state-sponsored attack. That forces Washington into a completely different type of response, doesn't it?
It severely limits Washington's options, yes. This signals Iran's willingness for direct, state-on-state kinetic confrontation with the United States. They've abandoned the shadow war.
Wow.
But look beyond just Washington and Tehran for a moment. Think about the geopolitical gravity for the host nations.
You mean places like Kuwait?
Exactly.
Well,
Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE. These Gulf states host immense U.S. military installations under the assumption of a mutual security umbrella.
the idea being that having U.S. troops there keeps them safe.
Right. The implicit agreement has always been that hosting American forces provides a deterrent against regional threats. Now, their sovereign territory is the target of massive Iranian missile strikes, specifically because those American forces are there.
That drastically heightens alliance tensions in the region.
It does. I mean, imagine the diplomatic panic behind closed doors. You're essentially painting a huge bullseye on your own country.
Yeah, these Gulf nations are now caught directly in the crossfire of a superpower conflict. Their domestic stability is threatened, their critical infrastructure is at risk, and it puts immense pressure on their delicate diplomatic ties with both Washington and Tehran.
They are suddenly thrust onto the front lines of a war they did not initiate.
It's like a powder keg inside a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
But the intelligence dashboard highlights that this conflict isn't just playing out on land or in the air over these bases. There is a massive maritime operation detailed here.
Operation Epic Fury.
Yeah, the U.S. military is calling it Operation Epic Fury. And the details the Ping I system has aggregated here are just wild. The U.S. reportedly destroyed over 30 Iranian ships.
30.
The briefing states they effectively wiped out the Iranian Navy, took out mobile missile launchers along the coast, and destroyed a drone carrier.
The scale of that is unprecedented.
And they even deployed B-2 stealth bombers to hit deeply buried sites. And then there's this one specific detail tucked into the report that really caught my eye. It says a U.S. submarine launched a torpedo strike, sinking an Iranian warship called the Iris Dina off the coast of Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean?
It means we're witnessing a rapid, terrifying expansion of the theater of war. Let's break down the components of Operation Epic Fury, because each piece tells a different strategic story.
Okay.
Taking out 30-plus ships and effectively neutralizing the Iranian surface navy in the Persian Gulf is about achieving absolute naval dominance in a highly constrained, incredibly vital environment.
The Persian Gulf is quite narrow, isn't it?
It's essentially a maritime bottleneck. Operating massive aircraft carrier strike groups in the Gulf is incredibly dangerous because they're restricted in their movements and vulnerable to asymmetric tactics.
Like what?
Things like swarms of fast attack craft, coastal anti-ship missiles, or naval mines. By executing a sweeping operation to clear those 30 vessels, the U.S. is attempting to secure the immediate operational area, protect its own multi-billion-dollar assets, and ensure freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz.
And the B-2 bombers. We don't hear about those being deployed very often. Why use stealth bombers instead of standard cruise missiles from a destroyer?
The presence of B-2 Spirits is highly significant. B-2s are typically reserved for a very specific type of mission, penetrating highly contested airspace to deliver specialized, heavy munitions against deeply hardened subterranean targets.
Like the bunker.
Right. We're talking about massive bunker buster bombs that standard cruise missiles or carrier-based fighter jets simply cannot carry or deliver with the necessary kinetic force. The fact that Ping AI highlights their deployment tells us the U.S. isn't just hitting surface ships.
They're going after the command centers.
They're going after the most secure, deeply buried command and control centers or heavily fortified weapons caches embedded inside mountains.
Okay, that makes sense for the immediate geographic region. But the Sri Lanka Strait, that's the detail I can't shake. Sri Lanka is nowhere near the Persian Gulf.
No, it's not.
It's an island nation sitting at the bottom of India, right in the middle of the vast Indian Ocean.
And that is exactly the detail that should make every global analyst and, frankly, every listener sit up straight. Sinking the Iris Dana off the coast of Sri Lanka expands the geographic footprint of this conflict by thousands of miles.
It's a massive leap.
Achieving dominance in the Gulf is an expected, almost routine tactical requirement in this scenario. But a U.S. submarine actively engaging and sinking an enemy surface vessel in the deep waters of the Indian Ocean indicates that the maritime front is widening substantially.
What are the logistics of that? How does a strike like that even play out?
Well, it requires immense intelligence gathering, tracking, and coordination. Fast attack submarines operate completely undetected. For a U.S. sub to track the Iris Dina, which was likely attempting to operate far from the primary conflict zone, perhaps to project power or secure supply lines, and then successfully execute a torpedo strike, it demonstrates total global maritime reach.
But the implications?
The implications are what we really need to focus on. The Indian Ocean is one of the most critical transit arteries on the entire planet. By turning those waters into an active kinetic combat zone where warships are being sent to the bottom, you are directly endangering global trade routes.
Specifically the routes heading to Asia, right?
It's exactly. Massive energy shipments from the Middle East to China, Japan, and India, as well as an enormous percentage of global manufactured cargo, traverse those exact waters.
You're essentially sending a shockwave through the global shipping industry.
Telling them that the war has officially left the confines of the Middle East and entered the open ocean. Insurance premiums for cargo ships will skyrocket instantly. Ships will be forced to reroute thousands of miles around the Cape of Good Hope, and supply chains will freeze.
So, if trade routes in the Indian Ocean are suddenly a war zone, my immediate thought goes to the global supply chain. What is this intelligence actually saying about the markets? Because when you mess with global shipping companies and energy routes, you instantly mess with the global economy.
You do.
Which naturally brings us to the next massive cluster of data in this briefing, the economic shockwaves. This is where we see how these distant military maneuvers directly impact your wallet. Because according to Ping AI, Iran's retaliation wasn't solely aimed at U.S. military bases in Kuwait. They also aimed squarely at the global oil supply.
The lifeblood of the economy.
The briefing details a retaliatory Iranian drone strike on a Saudi Aramco refinery. They hit the Ras Tanura facility, sparking a massive fire and completely halting operations.
Ras Tanura is not just another refinery on the map. It is a cornerstone of the global economy. It's one of the oldest, largest, and most critical oil processing and export facilities in the entire world.
Oh, wow.
It sits on the coast of the Persian Gulf and is essentially the beating heart of Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure. When operations are completely halted there due to a massive fire from a drone strike, it isn't a minor supply chain hiccup. It is a cardiac arrest for global energy markets.
Because so much of the world's daily oil consumption flows through that specific geographic point.
Millions of barrels a day. The strategic calculation by Iran to strike Ras Tanura is fascinating and incredibly dangerous. It achieves two massive objectives simultaneously. First, it's a very blunt message to Saudi Arabia.
What kind of message?
Well, Riyadh has been engaged in a very delicate China broker diplomatic detente with Tehran in recent years, trying to cool regional tensions. By hitting their most prized economic asset, Iran is saying, if our infrastructure burns, yours burns too.
It severely risks drawing the Saudis deeper into a direct regional conflict.
And they possess a massive, well-equipped military of their own.
Right. And the second objective?
It's a form of asymmetric economic warfare against the entire global financial system. Iran knows it cannot defeat the U.S. military in a conventional war, but by shutting down Ras Tanura, Iran guarantees an instantaneous massive spike in global energy prices.
Which hurts the West.
Exactly. High energy prices put immense inflationary pressure on Western economies, the very economies that are backing the U.S. and Israel. It's a way of making the average American or European voter feel the pain of this war immediately at the gas pump in the grocery store.
And we can see that exact economic pain playing out in real time in the market implications dashboard provided by the Ping AI intelligence report. I want to spend some time here because looking at these numbers, this dashboard reads like a financial distress signal.
It's a sea of red, well, and green, depending on what you're trading.
Right. I'm going to walk through these metrics sequentially, and I really want you to break down what the AI is seeing. Let's start with crude oil. The briefing lists crude oil WTI at plus 15%, and it's flagged as bullish with high confidence.
To understand the gravity of that, we need to define the terms. WTI stands for West Texas Intermediate, which, along with Brent crude, is one of the primary global benchmarks for oil pricing. It's the underlying commodity price that dictates what you pay at the pump.
So a 15% spike is huge.
A 15% overnight surge in crude oil is catastrophic for inflation modeling. The Ping AI system's high confidence in this bullish assessment makes perfect logical sense. Look at the inputs it's receiving. You have the total destruction of operations at the massive Saudi refinery at Ras Tanura, combined with an active naval war breaking out in the Persian Gulf where 30 ships just went down.
And that naval war directly threatens the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly, a maritime choke point where roughly a fifth of the world's daily liquid petroleum consumption transits. The commodity markets are looking at that reality and instantly pricing in a massive, prolonged, and severe global supply shortage.
Put that in perspective for you, the listener. A 15% jump in crude oil doesn't just mean your commute gets more expensive tomorrow morning. Oil is baked into the cost of everything.
Literally everything.
It means the cost of jet fuel goes up, making air travel and overnight logistics drastically more expensive. It means the diesel that powers the freight trains and the long-haul trucks delivering groceries to your local supermarket gets more expensive, so your food costs rise.
Plastics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals.
They all rely on petrochemicals. It's effectively an immediate, unavoidable tax on literally everything that moves or is manufactured.
You're highlighting exactly why economists call energy the master resource. When the master resource spikes 15% in a single trading session, the inflationary ripple effects touch every single sector, every single business, and every single consumer on Earth.
Which perfectly explains the next metric flashing red on the dashboard. The VIX is up 20%, and it is also flagged bullish with high confidence. I see this acronym thrown around on financial news networks whenever the markets get shaky, but what is the Ping AI system actually tracking here?
The VIX is the Chicago Board Options Exchange Volatility Index. On Wall Street trading floors, it is universally known simply as the fear gauge.
The fear gauge?
Yeah. It doesn't track a specific stock or commodity. Rather, It measures the stock market's expectation of volatility over the next 30 days based on the pricing of S&P 500 index options.
Yeah.
It measures how wildly traders think prices are going to swing.
So a 20% spike is essentially a measurement of pure panic.
Precisely. When the VIX spikes 20% in a day, it means institutional investors, hedge funds, and the algorithmic trading systems that run modern finance are hitting the panic button.
They're looking at the raw data.
They're looking at the Middle East ablaze, burning refineries, American casualties, and sunken warships in the Indian Ocean. And they are preparing for massive, unpredictable, and violent swings in the broader market. It's the financial equivalent of a seismograph needle jumping off the paper right before the ground cracks open.
Okay, so when the institutions and the algorithms get terrified, where do they put their money? The dashboard tells us exactly where the capital is fleeing. Gold is up 5%, marked bullish with moderate confidence.
That is a textbook market reaction. For thousands of years, gold has been the ultimate historical safe haven asset.
Because it's tangible.
Right. It's a tangible, finite commodity that isn't tied to the debt or the promises of any single government. Whenever there's a major geopolitical crisis, a kinetic war, or a severe inflationary threat, and right now, as the Ping AI data shows, we have all three of those nightmare scenarios occurring simultaneously.
Capital flees.
Capital flees from risky assets like stocks or emerging market currencies and floods into gold. A 5% jump in a single day for an asset as massive and generally stable as gold is a massive seismic shift. It's a very clear signal that major institutional money is looking for a bunker to hide in until the storm passes.
Okay, I'm looking at the next metric, and I have to admit I'm genuinely confused. The U.S. dollar index is up 2%, marked bullish with moderate confidence. Wait, hold on. We are actively taking casualties, dropping bunker busters, sinking ships in the Indian Ocean, and risking a global macroeconomic meltdown. And the world's response is to buy our currency. How does that make any sense?
It feels like a massive contradiction, doesn't it?
Totally.
But you're bumping into the structural reality of the global financial system. It's a phenomenon economists often refer to in relation to the dollar smile theory. The U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. The vast majority of global trade, cross-border debt, and commodity pricing is denominated in U.S. dollars.
Right.
In times of extreme global panic and uncertainty, despite the fact that the United States is a primary belligerent in this escalating conflict, the U.S. dollar and U.S. Treasury bonds are still perceived globally as the deepest, most liquid, and safest harbor in the entire world.
So it's the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry theory?
Exactly that. When panic sets in, international investors sell off riskier emerging market currencies, they dump the euro or the pound, and they scramble to acquire dollars to service their debts and secure their capital.
But the AI only gave it moderate confidence.
Which likely reflects a very sophisticated calculation. While the immediate flight to safety favors the dollar today, the massive uncalculated costs of funding a new multi-theater war could eventually severely strain the U.S. fiscal situation and weigh on the currency long term.
Which brings us to the final, and perhaps most immediately painful metric for the average listener who has a 401k or a pension. The S&P 500 is down 3%, marked bearish with high confidence in the short term.
A 3% drop in the S&P 500 in one day is staggering. We're talking about the instantaneous evaporation of trillions of dollars in market capitalization.
Trillions.
Trillions. This is the definition of a risk-off environment. The fear of uncontrolled military escalation, combined with the absolute certainty of an energy-driven inflation spike, is causing investors to aggressively dump equities. Think about the companies that make up that index.
The big tech companies, manufacturing.
Companies that rely on complex global supply chains are terrified of the Indian Ocean conflict. Airlines and logistics companies that rely on cheap fuel are seeing their profit margins erased by the Ras Tanura strike. Consumer goods companies know that if inflation spikes, the average citizen will stop buying their products. They're all taking a massive collective hit today.
It's incredible and honestly terrifying how fast the dominoes fall. An intercepted drone strike on a refinery complex thousands of miles away instantly, within mere hours, translates into a shrinking retirement portfolio, exponentially more expensive consumer goods, and pain at the gas pump for someone living in Ohio or Manchester.
It's immediate.
The global economy isn't a collection of independent states. It's this incredibly tight, highly fragile spider web. You pluck one string violently in the Middle East, and the whole web shakes.
The spider web analogy is perfect.
Yeah.
Because the vibrations from that plucked string don't just affect financial markets in New York or London. As we move into the next section of the intelligence briefing, we're going to see how those exact vibrations are causing absolute chaos on secondary fronts.
Secondary fronts.
Yes, because while the world's attention, the news cameras, and military assets are focused entirely on Iran and the Persian Gulf, other crises are rapidly cascading out of control.
Let's talk about those cascading crises. The Ping AI briefing categorizes this under secondary fronts and humanitarian disasters. First up on this list is the escalating situation in Lebanon.
Right.
The data shows Israeli airstrikes heavily targeting the Dahia suburbs of Beirut. The casualty numbers reported here are grim: 77 to 102 people killed and over 500 wounded. And the briefing explicitly notes a very disturbing detail. This is happening even after civilian evacuations were ordered.
That's a crucial detail.
The stated targets for these strikes were sites linked to the Quds Force. I've heard that name, but what exactly is the Quds Force and why are they being targeted in Beirut?
The Quds Force is a highly specialized branch of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They're essentially Iran's external operations and unconventional warfare arm. Their primary mission for decades has been to cultivate, fund, train, and arm proxy militias across the Middle East.
And their biggest proxy is Hezbollah.
Yes. Their most successful, most heavily armed proxy is Hezbollah, which is based in Lebanon.
So Israel is striking Iranian military assets that are embedded inside Lebanon.
Yes. The Dahia suburbs in southern Beirut have long been known as a densely populated stronghold and command center for Hezbollah. From a tactical military perspective, Israel is taking advantage of the broader, chaotic regional cover of the war with Iran to aggressively degrade Hezbollah's command and control capabilities.
They're seizing the moment.
Exactly. Israel knows that Hezbollah possesses an arsenal of tens of thousands of rockets pointed at their northern border. By hitting these Quds force-linked sites in Dahia now, they're attempting a preemptive decapitation strike, trying to cripple Hezbollah's ability to launch a massive, coordinated northern front against Israel, while the Israeli military is already heavily engaged in a complex war with Iran.
But the human cost over 100 dead and 500 wounded after evacuations. That speaks to just how densely populated the Dahia neighborhood is and how massive these munitions must be to cause that kind of collateral damage.
It's an urban warfare nightmare. And there's a historical context here that the Ping AI system is likely factoring into its threat models known as the Dahia Doctrine.
The Dahia Doctrine.
Yes. It stems from the 2006 Lebanon War, where the Israeli military applied disproportionate force to civilian infrastructure utilized by Hezbollah in this exact same neighborhood, with the goal of establishing deterrence. The strategic risk we are looking at today extends far beyond just neutralizing Hezbollah's rocket caches.
What's the broader risk to the region?
The complete and total collapse of the Lebanese state. Lebanon is a nation that has been teetering on the edge of complete political, economic, and social failure for several years.
Right, their economy has been in freefall.
Their currency has collapsed, their banking sector is frozen, and their political system is paralyzed. It is an incredibly fragile society. A sustained, heavy bombing campaign leveling entire blocks in the capital of Beirut risks pushing the broader Lebanese state into the abyss.
And when a state collapses?
When a state totally collapses, you lose all basic municipal services. Law and order completely disintegrates, and inevitably, you trigger massive, desperate refugee flows. We could very quickly be looking at hundreds of thousands of newly displaced Lebanese citizens, alongside the hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees who are already sheltering in Lebanon, fleeing toward the Mediterranean Sea, trying to secure passage to Europe.
It's a secondary humanitarian disaster of epic proportions waiting to happen.
It is.
And speaking of secondary disasters, here's where the briefing gets really interesting and honestly incredibly tragic. The dashboard highlights a situation deep in Africa with the high threat level designation.
Yes, the DRC.
Right. While every satellite in orbit and every news anchor is pointing at the Middle East, a massive tragedy is unfolding in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The intelligence indicates that the M23 rebel group, which the briefing specifically notes is backed by neighboring Rwanda, has been advancing rapidly.
And causing chaos.
This military advance led to intense clashes that triggered a massive landslide at a coltan mine. Over 400 civilians were buried and killed in this single event.
400 people.
Additionally, the briefing notes that over in Sudan, clashes between the RSF and SF forces in the Darfur and Kordofan regions have left dozens dead. I want to break this down, starting with the Congo. What exactly is a coltan mine?
If we connect this specific tragedy in the DRC to the bigger picture of the global economy we were just discussing, we have to look very closely at that single word, coltan.
Okay.
Coltan is short for columbite tantalite. It's a dull black metallic ore extracted from the earth. But when coltan is industrially refined, it becomes a heat-resistant metal powder called tantalum.
Tantalum.
Tantalum is absolutely vital, completely indispensable to the production of high-performance capacitors.
Capacitors, which are the tiny components that store and regulate electrical charges in circuit boards. So they're in practically everything electronic, right?
Exactly. Everything. Every single smartphone in the world, every laptop computer, the advanced battery management systems in electric vehicles, highly sensitive medical imaging equipment, and crucially right now, the advanced military targeting systems in the very drones and missiles being fired in the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
They all fundamentally rely on tantalum. And a massive, disproportionate percentage of the world's accessible coltan reserves are located in the eastern regions of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So when we read this briefing, this isn't just a distant, isolated tragedy in a remote jungle. It is a fundamental global resource war.
That is just a chilling realization. So these 400 civilians, men, women, maybe children, they essentially died in a landslide caused by a brutal military conflict over the raw minerals that are actively powering the device you, the listener, might be using to hear us right now.
That is the dark, often ignored underbelly of our hyper-connected global tech supply chain. Armed factions like M23 and numerous other rebel groups and state actors fight ruthless proxy wars for physical control of these incredibly lucrative mining sites to fund their military operations.
This is a blood mineral.
It is. When 400 civilians die in a catastrophic landslide during these violent clashes, it exacerbates what is already one of the longest-running, deadliest, and most underreported humanitarian crises on the planet. Millions have been displaced in the DRC over the decades due to this exact dynamic.
And what does Ping AI predict the macroeconomic impact of this specific M23 advance will be?
Well, if the M23 conflict continues to escalate and physically shuts down regional coltan extraction and smuggling routes, the global supply of tantalum plummets. When supply plummets, the cost of manufacturing consumer electronics, EVs, and advanced technology worldwide will inevitably spike.
It's another bottleneck.
Exactly. It's another severe inflationary pressure point, hitting the exact same global supply chain that is currently dealing with a 15% spike in oil prices and an Indian Ocean naval war.
It's just crisis layered on top of crisis. And what about the data point regarding Sudan?
The conflict in Sudan is a brutal, existential struggle for control of the state apparatus between two massive military factions. You have the Sudanese Armed Forces, the AFF, which is the national military, and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, a heavily armed paramilitary group.
And they're clashing in Darfur.
The clashes in Darfur and Kordofan mentioned in the briefing add explosive fuel to an already raging civil war. The intelligence concern here is regional contagion.
Contagion meaning the violence spilling over the borders.
Violence, yes, but primarily the displacement of millions of people. It's creating one of the largest refugee crises in the world, severely destabilizing neighboring countries like Chad, Egypt, and South Sudan, who are desperately trying to absorb the influx of traumatized, starving people.
And Ping AI flags this now because
it represents massive cross-border instability that is being entirely overshadowed by the events in the Middle East. With the U.S., Europe, and the UN completely focused on the Persian Gulf, international aid funding dries up, and diplomatic pressure to force a ceasefire in Sudan is diverted elsewhere. The combatants in Sudan note nobody is watching, which often leads to an escalation in brutal tactics.
Which perfectly leads into the final piece of the global map in the Ping AI briefing. The section is literally titled Diverted Attention.
A very apt title.
The dashboard shows an elevated threat level in Europe. Specifically, it notes that Russian artillery shelling is heavily intensifying in the Donetsk and Dobropilya regions of eastern Ukraine. Meanwhile, shifting to the Americas, the threat level is marked low. We've got isolated severe weather events listed, a massive tornado touching down in Oklahoma, and severe blizzard warnings blanketing Alaska.
The contrast there.
The briefing explicitly notes that these weather events have minimal global impact, causing just local logistical disruptions.
The contrast the AI is highlighting there is striking, isn't it? On one side of the world, we have massive naval battles, collapsing states, and shifting global power dynamics. And on the other side, in the U.S., the primary threats are tornadoes and snowstorms.
It really highlights the geographic insulation the United States still largely enjoys.
It does. But the data point regarding Ukraine is absolutely critical to the broader global security picture. Russia is explicitly and very calculatingly utilizing this massive global distraction.
Right, because geopolitical bandwidth is finite. If the US, the UK, and NATO allies are pouring all of their intelligence-gathering assets, their top-tier diplomatic capital, and crucially, their physical military hardware like air defense interceptors into the Middle East to protect Israel and Gulf allies, they have significantly less bandwidth and fewer munitions available for Ukraine.
Precisely. The intensification of Russian shelling in the Donetsk and Dobropilya sectors is a highly calculated, opportunistic move by military planners in Moscow. They see the West's attention and resources violently diverted toward Iran, and they are pushing their ground forces forward to maximize territorial gains while the window of distraction is open.
But what's the ultimate risk the AI is assessing there?
The intelligence assessment warns that sustained, heavy attrition in eastern Ukraine right now is incredibly dangerous. If Ukraine's defensive lines start to buckle due to a lack of resupply because those artillery shells were diverted to the Middle East, and if any lingering peace talks collapse entirely, it drastically increases the risk of broader, direct NATO involvement to prevent a total Ukrainian collapse.
Which is the nightmare scenario.
This is the ultimate danger of a two-front or multi-front global geopolitical crisis. The international system, both diplomatically and industrially, can barely handle resupplying one major high-intensity conflict. Handling two simultaneously stretches global alliances, political will, and physical military stockpiles to their absolute breaking point.
Okay, we have covered a staggering amount of ground, from the Persian Gulf to the DRC to the trenches of Ukraine. Let's look ahead to what comes next. Section 4 of the Ping AI report provides us with the 48-hour threat matrix.
This is where it gets very predictive.
Yeah. These are the specific, highly volatile indicators the intelligence community is actively watching over the next 24 to 48 hours. I'm going to integrate these 5 indicators into our discussion, and I want you to give us the sharp, unvarnished analytical commentary on the mechanics of why each one of these scenarios is a potential powder keg.
Let's do it.
Indicator number 1 is further Iranian retaliation. The AI is specifically watching for immediate responses against U.S. or Saudi assets and, crucially, monitoring for potential reactions at Iranian nuclear sites in the next 24 hours.
The primary overarching fear the intelligence community has regarding this specific indicator is the nuclear threshold.
Oh.
We discussed this earlier. Iran's conventional military forces, their surface navy in the Gulf, their mobile missile batteries, have just taken a massive, potentially generational beating. In geopolitical game theory, when a nation's conventional deterrent is severely degraded and they feel existentially threatened, the temptation to rush toward the ultimate untouchable deterrent and nuclear weapon increases exponentially.
So they might try to sprint for a bomb before the U.S. can hit them again.
Exactly. Right now, as we speak, intelligence analysts at the NRO and the CIA are intensely scrutinizing satellite imagery, thermal signatures, and intercepted communications for any movement of fissile material. They are looking for changes in security posture around their remaining, deeply buried nuclear infrastructure, like the Fordo facility.
Fordo being another heavily fortified site.
Yes. But they aren't just looking at the nuclear sites. The matrix also highlights the risk to U.S. and Saudi assets. Since Iran's conventional missile capacity is degraded, analysts are highly concerned about asymmetric attacks.
What does an asymmetric attack look like in the next 48 hours?
It could be a massive state-sponsored cyber warfare campaign aimed at crippling the U.S. financial sector or power grids. Or, more concerningly, the activation of physical sleeper cells. The IRGC has a long history of global reach. We could see coordinated terrorist attacks against U.S. embassies, Saudi diplomatic missions, or soft civilian targets globally in major Western capitals.
That is a terrifying prospect. Let's move to indicator number 2, Gulf oil infrastructure. The system is heavily monitoring for follow-on strikes and the possibility of total production halts across the region.
The analytical premise here is that the strike on the Ras Tanura refinery was a warning shot. It was Iran demonstrating capability and intent. The critical question for the next 48 hours is whether the leadership in Tehran decides they have nothing left to lose and orders their remaining drone and missile forces to go all in.
If they attempt to systematically cripple the entire Saudi or Emirati oil export capacity.
The macroeconomic consequences are almost unthinkable.
We talked about crude spiking 15% today. What happens if they hit more facilities tomorrow?
If we see follow-on coordinated drone swarms successfully bypassing air defenses and hitting other major refineries, pipelines, or massive export terminals like Ras Tanura, oil doesn't just spike 15%. It could double. I would be looking at an immediate, severe global energy crisis that rivals or exceeds the oil shocks of the 1970s. That level of sudden, extreme energy inflation would immediately trigger a deep, prolonged, and incredibly painful global recession, crushing industrial output and consumer spending worldwide.
Indicator number 3 focuses squarely on the American military. U.S. base attacks. The AI is keeping eyes specifically on sprawling bases in Iraq, Bahrain, and Qatar amid the threat of more drone and missile barrages.
We already have the grim reality of 6 Americans dead in Kuwait. If Iran, whether directly or through their remaining proxies, launches a second, larger wave of ballistic missiles against a massive installation like Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, or targets the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, the United States military will be forced into an exponential, almost uncontrollable escalation.
What does that escalation look like? Because we've already seen stealth bombers and sunken ships.
It moves from a punitive strike to a systemic dismantling of the state. It wouldn't just be B-2 bombers hitting hardened bunkers or sinking frigates. If massive U.S. casualties occur at a base like Al Udeid, you would be looking at the potential for a full-scale regime change operation directed by Washington.
That's a full-blown war.
That involves the total destruction of the Iranian electrical grid, communications networks, and military leadership. It would turn the entire Middle East into a multi-theater, multi-decade war zone, dwarfing the scale of the 2003 Iraq War. Every radar and early warning system in the region is being monitored 247, trying to predict and intercept the next launch.
Indicator number 4, Hezbollah and Israeli escalation. The system is closely watching the borders of Lebanon and vital maritime choke points, specifically highlighting the Strait of Hormuz.
This indicator tracks the 2 most potent asymmetric weapons Iran still possesses. First, Hezbollah. Despite the intense Israeli airstrikes on the Dahiya suburbs we discussed, Hezbollah still possesses a deeply entrenched, highly sophisticated arsenal of tens of thousands of rockets and precision-guided missiles pointing directly at Israeli population centers.
Waiting to be fired.
If Hezbollah's leadership decides on their own, or if Tehran issues a direct order to unleash that full arsenal in a massive coordinated barrage in response to the strikes on Beirut, Israel's Iron Dome air defense system will inevitably be saturated and overwhelmed.
Meaning the interceptors simply run out and the missiles hit the cities.
Yes. We would see mass casualties and infrastructure destruction in major Israeli cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa, which would trigger an even more devastating Israeli ground invasion of Lebanon. Simultaneously, the matrix highlights the Strait of Hormuz,
a maritime choke point.
If Iran realizes their surface navy is gone, they may resort to covertly deploying thousands of naval mines across the strait. By mining that narrow waterway, they literally choke off 20% of the world's liquid petroleum consumption. It's a dual threat indicator. The potential for massive regional civilian casualties in the Levant, combined with the threat of global economic strangulation in the Gulf.
And finally, indicator number 5 takes us back to Africa, Congo and Sudan spillover. The AI is continuously monitoring the severe refugee flows and the disruptions to global resource prices resulting from the intense African conflicts.
While it might lack the immediate visceral panic of a nuclear escalation or a frozen oil market, the collapse of Central Africa is a slow-motion systemic catastrophe. Intelligence agencies and NGOs are desperately monitoring border crossings into Uganda, Rwanda, Chad, and Egypt,
trying to prepare for the influx.
A massive, sudden, panicked influx of hundreds of thousands of refugees can destabilize those host governments practically overnight, exhausting their food, water, and medical supplies.
And the global resource aspect.
On the resource side, commodities desks and tech manufacturers are hyper-monitoring the spot price of tantalum and cobalt. If those markets freeze because the M23 violence prevents extraction or transportation of coltan out of the DRC, major technology manufacturers will not be able to source the raw materials needed for capacitors and batteries.
So no new phones, no EV batteries.
We could start seeing major multinational tech companies announcing production halts and massive supply chain delays within a matter of weeks.
Wow.
This raises an important question, though, as we step back and look at this entire, deeply complex 48-hour matrix. When you look at the data, which of these flashpoints stands out to you as most critical? Is it the immediate existential threat of a nuclear escalation in Iran? Is it the guaranteed economic devastation of a globally frozen oil market? Or is it the silent, crushing, long-term impact of the African resource wars on our technology supply chains?
It's almost impossible to choose just one because, as we've explored today, they are completely and utterly intertwined. You can't separate the oil market from the naval war, and you can't separate the tech supply chain from the conflict in the Congo. Which brings us to our final synthesis of this March 6th, 2026 intelligence briefing.
It's all connected.
We're looking at a world that is dealing with an actively degraded, yet highly dangerous and desperate Iran, pushed to the brink of crossing the nuclear threshold. We have massive, highly lethal naval engagements happening simultaneously in two different oceans, threatening global shipping lanes.
The Indian Ocean and the Gulf.
We have devastating technology resource disasters and mass displacement unfolding in Africa, and we have massive economic shockwaves instantly hitting global markets, shrinking retirement accounts, and raising the cost of living and the cost of energy for practically everyone on Earth. And the terrifying reality is that all of this is happening at the exact same time.
It's the very definition of a systemic cascading crisis. The traditional guardrails of global diplomacy, military deterrence, and economic stability are being stress-tested and are actively failing simultaneously across multiple continents.
Which leaves us with a lot to process. I want to turn it over to you for a final thought based on everything we've unpacked from the Ping AI data today.
When you look at the sheer, overwhelming scale of what we've discussed today, I want you to truly consider the vulnerability of our modern, hyper-connected world. We've spent the last several decades aggressively building a global society that is perfectly optimized for economic efficiency. We build just-in-time supply chains, globalized energy markets, and interdependent financial systems.
Everything optimized for speed and profit.
But the data today proves that we traded resilience for that efficiency. A single torpedo strike from a submarine in the deep waters of the Indian Ocean, or a tragic, violent landslide at a remote coltan mine in the Congo, doesn't just stay local anymore.
The ripple effects don't stop at the border.
They instantly, violently rewrite the economic reality for someone sitting in their living room looking at their phone halfway across the world. When our supply chains, our energy grids, and our global geopolitics were this tightly, inextricably braided together, we have to ask ourselves, is there really any such thing as a local conflict anymore? Or is every single regional war now fundamentally a world war, just fought through the complex mechanisms of global economics, energy flows, and microchips?
It's a profound and unsettling question, and exactly why we do these deep dives. Thank you so much for joining us as we navigated the complexities of the Ping AI intelligence briefing today. As always, stay curious, stay informed, and we will catch you next time.